Ciao Bambini, and welcome to this new episode of Rune Soup, a podcast about magic and anthropology and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. And this week's guest is Michael Ofek, and we'll be talking about the shamanic origins of astrology. And with these moving into this new live recording world, I'm doing something a bit different with the introductions, which is I'm going to introduce you, Michael, and then you're going to correct me with anything that I have either forgotten or left out or that you think is germane. So we shall begin. Michael is an astrologer, a teacher of astrology, a cosmologist. I got that from the website of the conference we both attended, and a shamanic practitioner based in Israel, has over 2 decades of experience with magic and astral magic and astrology. And yeah, what am I missing? What superpowers have you got, Michael, that I don't know about?
I think you mentioned most of them. I think maybe the highlight of my expertise, you can say, is really the research to the ancient roots, and that's, you said that, but maybe I can open that a little bit more. Well, really, my you can say my main interest, or the axis of what I've been doing for the last 2 decades is really trying to explore the ancient landscape by which astrology has developed from, a philosophical landscape, the ritualistic landscape that we'll probably talk about today also. And that led me also to the magical landscape and other elements that were part of that. But that's kind of the thing that I see myself as kind of the most maybe you can say unique expertise. This and the combination with the magical elements of the tradition.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to getting into that, but we have a traditional first question for traditional first-time guests. Michael, were you a weird kid?
Of course, I was a weird kid. It's an interesting question, and it's kind of an obvious for me. I was weird. I was secluded from other kids. I was very introvert. I was contemplating existential things since I think 5 or 6 years old. I have recordings with my father asking me philosophical questions, at 4 or 5 years old, and me answering him, the different things that are not very something that you would expect for someone that age. So I do see myself as weird and different in many respects, but not very. Externally, I blended in.
Right.
I didn't do too much of
So these childhood questions, these existential questions, were they, where do babies come from, or were they more like, what happens when we die? Like, where were you doing platonics at the age of 5 or 6? Tell me about it.
Well, my father would ask me, how did people come to be? How did everything come to be? What is God? I even remember, listening to the recordings, me telling him, Father, God is nature, don't you see? Or something of that sort, and he would ask me, what is sacred? And I would tell him, only things that people make sacred, or something of that sort. So these were the kind of questions that my father posed to me. My father was a philosopher. He had a doctorate in philosophy and literature. So I kind of inherited the, you can say, the existential friction, existential, identity troubles that my father brought with him. Um, so that, I think that was, had a large impact on the, of course, the um, my spiritual quest and my
Mm.
philosophical quest, and the
Would
passion for finding answers.
Yeah, so would you say then that philosophy came first, and then maybe astrology, and then maybe um, shamanic frameworks and magic, or like, do you think if that was it was sort of the family business, right? Like, do you think maybe was that the one that came first, or do you think something else did?
In my family, you mean, or in
Yeah,
history?
in your if your father's a philosopher and he's asking you philosophical questions, does that mean
Philosophy
you?
came first.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. The doubting everything, the kind of breaking the aquarium of conventional thinking from a very young age. That helped many things unstick on me as I grew. That helped me kind of the cultural indoctrination, sort of unstick, for a lack of a better word now. So I was, from a very early age, I remember looking at the mirror and thinking, what is this big ape? I was touching my face, and I couldn't believe, I didn't know what it is. It's breathing, it has blood inside, and I would get panic attacks from that. I would
Mm.
become white, and I would kind of, I wouldn't understand what's going on. That's in simple terms what I was feeling. And later on, I experienced many experiences that were, very different and very untalked about in average circles, like, out of body experiences. I was experiencing this from a very early age, and just later on, I remembered experiences from being a child, that I would just fly around the house, or go to the school and fly and go through walls and see things, and come back and fall into my body. And I kind of dismissed those as dreams. But later on, I understood what they are, and I
Mm.
started to control them more.
Yeah, no one ever goes anywhere good when it starts. Like, what are you doing going to school?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's kind of a habit thing, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting the existential experience of being unfamiliar with the body. I had a version of that at a similar age where I kind of had a panic attack or broke down or something when I knew I wasn't going to die, like in the sense of I continue after death because I was so tired. I mean, I was like 7 or 8. I think I'd been up too late anyway. But I just had this moment of like, oh, this actually one way or the other never ends. And it was this weird feeling of like contemplating mortality and death and so on, and kind of knowing that even that wasn't the end. I'm like, God, I'm so tired already. It's funny that sort of brought something up for me I hadn't thought about for years, which was I didn't have like a bodily dissociation thing, but I was kind of like, oh, can we all just sit down? Can we all just sit down for a bit?
I need to go through all this again now, all the life, all this cycle.
So, like doing the having spontaneous OBEs, for instance. Anything else as you move through adolescence? You talk to the dead? Ended up living in a haunted house? Any of that kind of stuff?
I did, but a bit later than that. I had a lot of conversation with the dead, truly, in kind of a semi-hypnagogic state where my body was, how do you say, like, paralyzed, like,
Mm-hmm.
sleep paralysis. So I was kind of in between, can take, my astral hands, you can say, out, and I was in that state. I had many experiences of that, like you can say, being semi-paralyzed on the bed, and then, uh, a person who died lately, or someone else that different, would come and speak to me. So of course that was, very scary, and I also got attacked a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. Hag attacks, that the kind of classic sleep paralysis stuff of being in bed and having things come at you, being paralyzed in bed.
Most of my memories of these experiences when I was in that sleep paralysis state, because that was before I knew how to move out and control the state. Sometimes I would just wake out, outside of my body, and then I could move freely. But sometimes I was kind of stuck at that, in that place, and I would see things, and things would approach me and talk to me, sometimes more friendly and sometimes less friendly. And I did experience something as a haunted place in India once, when sort of a feminine, I don't know if to tell that story.
Fair enough.
You're a good interviewer. You opened me up fast.
Yeah, the trick is to ask people about their childhood, and they kind of get on uncomfortable footing, and then all of a sudden they're giving you their bank account details. It's great.
Yeah, that's good. That's nice magical trick.
Yeah.
So I was, you can say, sort of, for lack of a better word, a kind of astrally raped or something, or at least it was tried to by some feminine entity that sort of coerced. Um, I managed to escape that, but it was so traumatic for me. It was so powerful and strange, and I found myself crying most of the night. This was like, you know, 18 years ago, yes, or even more. But I will never forget that. That was just very,
We've
very
we've had
scary.
we've had a few similar experiences, and I had a couple of attacks with a sort of female, I guess, succubus demon or whatever you want to call it. Late adolescence, maybe 17, 18, and then I left Australia for a long time, for like 15 years. And when I came back and we moved into this rental house out west of Sydney, on one of the first nights, and I'm better at magic now, right? So we moved into this place and I warded the house and all the rest of it. But while I was asleep one night, this being actually came all the way to the fence and was kind of like looking over the fence. So she'd found me again, having come back to Australia. Didn't get in, but I had like a paralysis, unwanted sex type thing a couple of times. Yeah, but about late adolescence, 17, 18, and it was kind of interesting. But the fascinating kind of twist to that story was at the end that it came, because you're never really sure. Obviously, you go off, and the years, and like maybe it was just a bad dream, and then no, she came back. She just didn't get in this time. And that was kind of interesting. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
well, I'm sure and you have that experience, but uh, that was not even close to a dream in any way possible. As much as we can experience reality, as tangible, this was completely tangible, and it was painful. And it was like someone is sitting above you. You're putting something over your mouth, and you want to shout, and you can see that entity or whatever, and it just does what it does, and you feel violated. It's I did manage to kind of learn, you can say, astral martial arts since then. And I don't have a lot of entities now that are taking the challenge of trying to do such a thing for me. But I guess this is a kind of an important initiation also, to understand that the non-physical has many entities. It's a bit like walking the street. You have different kind of people. Not all of them benevolent and want your well-being. Some of them want your power. They want your energy. They want to influence you in so different ways. So I guess that was important to experience this.
Yeah, I agree. So when was that? Not that particular experience. That was sort of early adulthood. But were you aware at the time that these OBEs probably not were happening? So did anything happen in the childhood, or what was the event that made you realize this stuff, like the philosophy is cool, but this stuff is a kind of real? This is why I asked the weird kid thing, because some people have lived in haunted houses and so on. So they've grown up with the reality we were just talking about. It is initiatory to kind of have that first undeniable encounter that we're playing a much bigger game than we were previously led to believe. So when was that for you, do you think? When was the thing that happened?
Well, the experiences, I would say, the existential contemplations and the frictions, etc., were since I remember myself. But I didn't get into philosophy or into kind of mystical schools. Um, how can I say it? Well, I experienced those things before, so it kind of built a passion within me to a deep thirst to understand, um, what was happening. So later I approached these schools, and I practiced many different techniques and many different more esoteric philosophical um, branches. I don't know if did that answer
Yeah,
your
sort of.
question? Yeah,
I've got a similar version of that question, which is, and it's because I'm writing the book accompanying my fortune telling deck at the moment. And I have a memory of the first time I saw a pack of tarot cards. I was about 9 or 10. It was in the local newsagents, and it was sort of like a pirated, cheaply printed Waite Smith tarot. And I couldn't believe, it was sort of the first time that I realized that this exists in our reality and it's not just something from stories. And do you remember, like, maybe the first time it occurred to you, or that you encountered astrology as something robust, as something other than like newspaper horoscopes, when it's like, wait a minute, wait, this is a thing, we can do this? Because I have an early memory of, wait a minute, so tarot cards are real, what else is real, what have you not told me about, right? And so I had this kind of moment as a kid of like, hang on. And it was a sort of, usually when people, if you, particularly because you teach astrology and are astrologer and so on, people generally remember the first time they laid eyes on their love across the room. You know what I mean?
I have two memories. I have a memory as a child, having my father or my mother read something of the horoscope to me and telling me something of that my completing or complementing sign is the sign that is opposite my sign. And I was thinking, what does that mean? And then I searched and I've seen the wheel, and then I started understanding that there's this, kind of axis of signs opposite each other, and so that kind of opened up my mind, because I knew about horoscopes, but I also was very skeptical. And I remember I also had a kind of um, how do you say, like a kind of a very concrete idea that everyone would identify with their horoscope. It's just too general, and that was my kind of reflex reply for anyone that talked about astrology. Uh, but that was a turning point, seeing the wheel and understanding there's more nuances to the dynamics of the signs. And the real knockout was a friend of mine that came and made a chart for me. Um, and I was pretty young, and he did the chart, and he did it really bad, thinking retrospectively.
Yeah.
Like a 5-minute reading,
Yeah.
something very, very shallow. But I looked at the chart and I've seen all the connections, and I was seeing, a mystery that I have to solve, and I'm trying to solve that sense. It became an obsession, and I think that's really what moved me into the traditional, because I didn't find the answers in modern books.
They don't appear to be interested in them. I kind of, the last astrology spent the last few centuries hiding in things that are only slightly more respectable to its detriment, right? Like psychology and some sort of silly version of science and what have you. And it's only when it gets down to its wilder roots that you find the potency of it, I think. And it is sort of surprising to me how little, outside of the kind of Hellenistic revival, how little people are interested in like the wild rather than the farmed version of it, I guess. I don't know. Cool.
Yeah.
So carry on.
Yeah, I think that the how do you say, like, well, very, very fundamental questions of why are things as they are in astrology. That was, I think, the first triggers of going back in time, because I was looking at different constituents of the language, and I was saying, okay, but why does houses play that role? Why is this house this meaning? Why is this sign this meaning? What, and that was playing in my head, and I couldn't do astrology without having answered for that. I couldn't just take the rules and play them out. What does it mean that it's, planet rules a sign? I, it, it just never sat with me, and going back and finding the Hindsight project with all the translation, Robert Schmidt's translations, and Robert Zoller, and the work of Robert Hand, and others, and Meira Epstein. That opened up a real, how do you say, the hole that the bunny goes in. I forgot the name.
Oh yeah. A whole rabbit hole. Yeah.
The rabbit hole. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that was the entrance to the rabbit hole, and I'm still at the rabbit hole since then. I think.
Cool.
But I got a lot of answers, and not that the ancient texts are direct by answering those questions. It's not the case. But if you connect the dots of the cosmology and the philosophy of the times, and the kind of hints that the authors put inside their books, kind of cryptic hints, then you start to connect the dots and understand. And that was, I think, a main part of my passion for the last 2 decades or more.
Yeah, I know what you mean about it's all well and good to take it back to, say, the first few centuries AD, because, and we discussed this before organizing this episode, and I get to ask you my favorite leading question in a moment. But for the pieces that magic, insofar as it is different to astrology in a European context, and it's arguable if it is different at all, but let's just say the Venn overlap is significant between Hellenistic astrology and kind of European understanding of magic. How did the pieces get there? How did the pieces get to Alexandria? Was always kind of like it's like the next question on from that, rather than, I love the idea of being interested in the cosmic structure of astrology, like why does a planet rule a sign? Why do the signs have these characteristics? And that stuff is certainly found gloriously in that Hellenistic era, right? But how did the stuff get into there to happen? So I get to ask you my favorite leading question, Michael. How old is astrology?
Well, I think its roots are kind of begin somewhere in the mists of prehistory. And to to simplify it without trying to, point it down to a place or a time. It's I think they're connected to a very primordial aspect of humans, from a very early stage of kind of interacting with, these magnificent lights that they were seeing in the sky. And there's something that I always try to invoke again is the in a sense the memory, because not everyone knows the difference between how we see the sky today and how the ancients saw the sky then, without any light pollution.
Oh yeah.
You have to get to the middle of the desert to see that, and then you can really see the Milky Way moving like it's a river. It's unbelievable, uh, unbelievable awe. And so if you go to that really kind of first encounter, you can say, or at least conscious encounter, and the interaction with it, even the interaction that is done by projecting myth on constellation or whatever, this is all, as you said beautifully in your presentation, this is all ways of relating
Yeah.
to the sky and making meaning out of them, etc. So I think astrology has begun then.
Yes.
And I think, what we have documented is a kind of, how do you say, kind of the accumulated experience that has been articulated more methodically, of course, the Greeks, and kind of as it moved on, and we can see that in the Hellenistic period, just that period of change between something that is more experiential, more poetic, more visionary, than the more scientific, and that's culminated in Ptolemy in a sense, and of course the Arabs and other, and the medievals and stuff.
I think that's, we spoke about that. I think that's really true. And it's funny, I have been out in the desert multiple times doing the stars thing. Australia has a lot of desert, and it is, we kind of have a dark sky national park thing going on where we live. So some nights it's almost as good, but there's something essential about it being a desert. And people, it's not just for very often it's people's first encounter of the star nations without the light pollution, but the lengths of time that we're talking about, people also need to sit with. I joked about it when Starships came out. It was the only thing on TV for 100,000 years. Like that's what we looked at. That's yes. And the idea that 100,000 years of entangling our consciousness with these beings, what couldn't that achieve? It's that's how old astrology is for me. And I think we do that as humans because there is that unconscious understanding that in some real sense we are kind of like from there, right? So the Burong and other Aboriginal tribes consider the stars to be the campfires of their ancestors. So it's this, and it's funny because that's kind of, you can sort of squint at that, or more specifically, science has a worse description of that when we talk about the material that this planet and these humans are made of coming from stars, right? So it's this idea that at these long timelines, that is, sky country is in some sense our home. So for me, that's how old astrology is too. And I remember us chatting before, because there's sort of a big gap, and it depends on how you define things, but you lose and gain some stuff when you systematize. And it's almost like the Hellenistic coherence or the rise of precision inside astrology, which happened elsewhere in the like the classical world, right, and the Hellenistic world. This kind of rise of precision brought some good things with it, but also cost some things. So we're talking by the internet. Everyone complains about their smartphones, as well they should, but there are things that you can do with smartphones that you couldn't previously do, and that's kind of like the rise of complexity comes with opportunity and challenges. And there is something interesting about astrology now where you can do it without ever looking at the sky. And I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yes. Well, part of the jump, I think, to horoscopy or horoscopic astrology, and that was even before that, probably through the Babylonians and even the Egyptians. That the most of the focus was put on the ecliptic,
Hmm.
and then you get kind of that narrow band, which of course is you can see the logic there. That's the plane of all the planets moving, of course, and the sun, of course. But you kind of miss out on 90% of the sky, and the co-risings of constellations, and the co-rising and setting of fixed stars, and you don't see a lot of astrologers talk about the Big Bear, or other extra zodiac constellations, and these served also as very important astrological um, parts of the puzzle. So I think that was kind of a big shift. Looking at the chart, you kind of put the three-dimensional celestial sphere on a two-dimensional only zodiac zone, taking the reality of the experience of the whole sky to a very, very narrow kind of focus. Um, and one of the things that when I contemplated the cosmological origins of astrology, and that will probably take us also to the shamanic ones, hopefully, um, I realized that there was one overarching concept, and that's the concept of
Hmm.
light in general. Because light, we say the word light lightly, but really, most of human history was trying to decipher what the hell light is, philosophically and physically, and we still don't understand that
Yeah.
really. And even if we take the modern conception of light as the electromagnetic radiation, then we know that light is much, much more, 99% more than visible light. So it's all light. Every kind of electromagnetic influence which holds our nucleus of the atoms of our body is connected to that field. So, in a sense, it is the most essential building block, or how do you say, like, interface, or sorry, English does not always come very easy. Um, so when you start looking at the language of astrology, you see the terminology speaking about um, cosmology of light. Really,
Hmm.
you can of course um, look at it also philosophically and platonically, as light. Um, of course, is always associated with the higher realms and the truth, and and deities and whatever, and illumination. But also in a more kind of intermediate physical metaphysical model, you can see how all the language, and I've done that, for a while. I was kind of reverse engineering everything in astrology to fit the model of light relationships, seeing, vision, um, and spectral phenomena. So, of course, this is in a very simplified way, but the conclusion I reached was that uh, you can explain almost anything going back to that um, um, model. Um, in the language of astrology, you can explain, just for instance, just to give you an example, you can explain the 12 signs of the zodiac as you know, as a spectral phenomenon that is connected to the relationship of the sun to the earth that repeats itself every year. So you have 12 phases of, you can say, quality of light that is, you can say, even to every day or every degree has a certain percentage of light and dark, a certain, you know, you could say an angle of the sun to the earth. And these things are also expressed through physical expressions, like, you know, dry, wet, cold, hot, or whatever that we can see in the seasons of the year. And these qualities of lights are really the spectral derivation, you can say, of, or unfoldment of the solar spectrum, or the solar, um, electromagnetic spectrum that influences us in every level of our being. So this is just one part of it. And then you can take the houses and you can look at the 12 phases of the daily cycle. And of course, you know, when the sun is highest in the sky, then you had the analogy of the longest day, and you have kind of the apex point of the sun, um, um, expression, manifestation, or whatever. And you have the ascendant as where the light rises, etc., etc. I won't get you into all that, but that just...
No, look. Yeah. No, I love it. So a couple of years ago, I had a light therapist come on the show. So he wrote a book about things like red light therapy. And I asked him that question. It's important we don't brush past it, right? I asked him, what is light? And he's like, actually, we don't know. We literally do not know what it is. And that's kind of important. Like, there's no non-self-referential definition of it. You can't get outside of or away from being in relation to light. And not just that, but if you look at the sort of development of light therapy, we have an infrared sauna and a red light thing on the farm, and you just kind of realize that red light is profoundly healing, and the sunrise and sunset light, which was sort of the pharaoh's job, was to be with Ra at those two moments in particular. Thoth, there's sort of this kind of awareness of that, the healing power of like sunrise and to some extent sunset. And it just doesn't, there's no way you can, how to say this right, there's no way you can like science that away. You can't actually, you are left with the unavoidable reality that there is no definition of, there is no like materialist definition of light. Light, let there be light. Light exists in the universe, and the rest of it is basically opinion, and that's like crucial. So to have like a language of light, or a language of light relation, I think is a really good way of talking about astrology. I'm very interested in different cycle models, and so there is a correlation between low solar output like we're currently experiencing and an increase in earthquakes and volcanoes, because the sun protects, or solar radiation protects us from deep space radiation, which actually agitates like the molten lava and the iron and so on. So we have and also we get more diseases at that time. It's kind of this interesting game of light and radiation that isn't, it is irreducible. And I think it's really important that we don't brush past when we talk about astrology as a language of light. There's no counter narrative that takes the magic away from light.
That's true. That's true. And if you look at it under a scientific lens and you say, what's a photon, then really, and I'm not a scientist, but you know, a photon is said to be zero mass. So you're really looking at the most non-material aspect of reality. You really, there's no matter there. It's even more interesting. You know, they made an experiment. They took a cube, like in a vacuum, and they put light in it, but you couldn't see the light. Only if you put something inside that would reflect it. So in a sense, we can't even see visible light. We can only see it reflected from particles in the air, or reflected from surfaces or colors, or emanating from its source. Maybe what we can't see it around us. When we see it, we only see that reflected from particles or whatever. So that's kind of the mystery of light, which I think is crucial to understand the ancient philosophy. And if you take that and kind of project that on the thinking of the intellectual light or the noetic light, so you can easily say that astrological light, or physical light, is an incarnation, or an image, or a reflection of intellectual light. So in a sense, then you go to the Platonic metaphysics, and you speak about that light within. For instance, when you close your eyes and you see images, where does this light come from? And isn't that the another principle of the solar energy, in a sense, as it kind of reflects in the noetic aspect of your soul, the ability to see or perceive. Because when we, I need to remind that to people sometimes, when we look at the chart and we look at the sun in the chart, we're not speaking of the physical sun, right? We're speaking of a solar principle that is that lives within the person, or expressed within the person. So that solar principle is that intellectual or noetic entity. Intellectual is a bit of a problematic word in modern sense. Noetic is kind of the well, that's, you can say consciousness, but that's also problematic. So then you have these layers of light, that you can that you can, in a sense, look at when you look at the chart, and interpret physical light in that sense, as a kind of a vessel for noetic or astral light. Then when you're really looking at, when you look at the chart, is kind of the you can say the picture of how the noetic dynamics of the soul, in a sense. So as the sun is the all-seeing eye of nous, so whatever it reflects from, in a sense, is where your noetic gaze is projected upon. This is the importance of the reflection of light from all other planets. And one of the things that I've done in my reconstruction is also show that all of the planets in their earliest names have names of a certain kind of light. All of them. The shining one, the burning one, the twinkling one, they are all coming from a direct experience of how the ancients saw the planets. And then you can derive that, for instance, Jupiter and Venus are the most bright, so they partake in the solar light the most, so therefore they're pro-life and benefic. And of course you have Mars, which is red, so that's probably part of his association of blood and war, and being a malefic, etc. And you have Saturn, very, very dim and brown and sort of gray. So again, everything leads back to that direct experience, that primordial experience, and it is the story of light. Because if there wasn't like light emanating from the sky, there was no experience of the sky, and there was no astrology. So seeing the sky and interacting with it, let's say pre-rational scientific explanation, that's the real roots, in a sense. If we put aside the later horoscopic more systemized astrology, then this is really the roots of it. And I think that we are missing these roots. We are missing the direct experience. And if you add astral magic to the picture, so this is really where you are intentionally engaging with these beings, these spiritual energy, this light, or whatever name you prefer to call it. Then you interact with that intentionally. You feel it. You feel it within you. You feel it in your body. And you kind of rekindle these almost atrophied sensors within you. I think that is a little bit why we look at that times as nostalgic, and in a sense romanticize it, because there was a magic there that we have lost, and our mind has just become too heavy with theories and excuse my French, but masturbating with words and terminologies, that we forgot that realm of direct engagement and experience, which is also very personal. It's something that it's hard to get. How do you say, to get that out from a book, or understand how to do it from you really have to contact this part of you that knows, in a sense. That a good definition, kind of weird but interesting definition of light in the philosophical sense of Surawadi, a kind of a Sufi philosopher from the 12th century. He said, light is that which is self-evident. In a sense, it is just what it is. It's an experience that doesn't need articulation. It's something within you knows light, because you're made of it, essentially, in different densities. And it's interesting that science is getting there also, biophotons and different ways of understanding how the mitochondria is connected to the light cycle as a clock, and everything in our body is moved and influenced by light. It's just unavoidable. And of course, much of it, or most of it, is light that we can't even perceive consciously. Sorry if I speaking too much about that, but I think this is kind of the key, because that takes us to the direct experience and how that builds the communication with these powers, and you can see that all around in the ancient world. The need to mirror the sky, the need to be in sync with the cosmos, and then you see that coming in Pythagoras. Then you see that coming in Plato. You see that in the Timaeus, when he speaks about the soul, the young soul coming into this realm, and pushed and pulled by the cycles of the planets, until it matures and knows how to differentiate same and other, and then it harmonizes its inner cycles with the outer cycles, which is, in a sense, how you immortalize the soul, and kind of connected your demiurgic powers. So I think that's a sentiment that was there much before Plato, and served as the ground for the experience of engaging with the stars. And there's no monopole for that for the West, as you know.
Yeah. So a guy, and I've been promoting his book now for a couple of years, and he's been on the show. Tyson Yunkaporta is an indigenous academic down here, and I'm very interested in his understanding or sharing of the difference between indigenous thought and not, and how we are typically not interested in indigenous ways of thinking, but they're products of thought. So I try to differentiate between ways of thinking and products of thought. So a way of thinking is this coming into relation with these light beings, with these star nations, right? So, and that's the kind of astrology we were talking about being really, really old. A product of that encounter, so a product of thought, in the sense that you can learn something by being in relation to these beings, is the horoscopic system. And I think people, maybe when they try to go, okay, cool, but like the horoscope stuff works, it's needing to sort of reposition. You can have both, right? And it's a question of where you sequence and where you put them, and to understand that the kind of the entire Mediterranean astrological project is one example of a product of thought that's come up off this planet from hundreds of thousands of years of ways of thinking, which I think is quite refreshing for people to hear or see. But it also brings me to the next kind of question, which is related to that, and that is what your definition of shamanism is, and tell us about, your how you found that, and your a bit about your journey through it.
Well, every time I try to make a definition, I say something different, but
Yeah.
it's. I would say, first of all, I consider it a universal sentiment. I don't look at it in the anthropological, academical, trying to, you know, there's a uniting element in shamanism that you can see all around the globe, which maybe the essence of it is being a bridge, or the interaction between the unseen and the seen, the interaction with the living essence, or the living um, um, entities and beings of nature, for instance, or planets, or is a feature of that. And then you have a lot of different motives um, that are kind of, you can say, unique to different shamanic schools, but sort of unite them. Like, of course, getting into altered states of consciousness is something major in most of what you can call shamanic, but also energy work. Qigong is a kind of has shamanic sources. The Taoist shamans, or the Wu shamans. They developed a way to lead, um, um, the life energy within their bodies and different centers. And you can see this all around. You can see this in the Andes, shamans in the Andes, and of course in India and other places. And I think that was also part of our Western tradition, but got lost, because there are hints of that. Um, and then you can really, if you look at the Western tradition, you can really, I can talk about this for hours, but you can see those motives everywhere. You can see them also in the Platonic philosophy. You can see the Socrates talking to his daimon. And of course, you have all this hierarchy of beings, and you have the underworld, and you have different philosophers like Parmenides, and I forgot his name right now, going to the underworld and having the visions and getting the knowledge and coming back, and you see it all around. And then you have the stories documented in Herodotus historical text, like Abaris, the Skywalker coming from Hyperborea, from the far north, which is probably Mongolia, coming as a priest of Apollo, and teaching Pythagoras and giving him the arrow of Apollo, which is kind of a golden talisman or something. And that has been really deeply researched by Peter Kingsley and other scholars. And And in my presentation, I was talking about, Orpheus as, a very, very important origin point, influencing later philosophy and mythology. And he was, in all accounts, a shaman in also every way. And he had Thracian roots. So the Thracian, the Scythians, the Nabateans, the whatever, all those cultures were kind of shamanic, paganic, working with forces of nature, working with music and ecstatic states and outer states of consciousness. And then, of course, you have the influences on theurgy, being a very experiential, ritualized way of uniting with the creative principles and gods and whatever, um, sort of bridging the rational and non-rational sides of the philosophical quest. Um, but it's everywhere. If you go to the Asclepius temples and you see, the caves by which they would do the incubations, these are all, of course, and the Eleusinian mysteries, and all these are all the ecstatic, experiential, direct ways of engaging either with external entities or with, you can say, you know, um, expressions of those entities in your soul, in your psyche. Um, so I think that's one of the missing keys in understanding astrological magical work, and I think we need to find that elsewhere. And I'm, as you know, I'm taking a lot from the Andean tradition, the Incas, the Queros, and their cosmovision, because they're really doing that kind of work. When they say they're children of the sun, this is not a theoretical thing for them or just a religious thing for them. They are doing powerful energy work with moving solar energy, connecting to solar beings, and of course not only the sun, but the sun is a central source of their work. So they understand those levels. They understand these different ways of engaging and opening those bridges and channels, and moving with them intentionally and consciously, which is, I think, should be the product of having an astrological chart of something, that it has to teach you how to move with it, or else, of course it has it is very valid as something that gives you just information and articulation and sort of clarity on the dynamics of your life internally and externally, but it is also a map to follow experientially as you move within the beating heart of the cosmos and the sun and the moon and the other cycles. It's kind of, we are in a need to find that again.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason why we are in such a accelerated revival of those things.
Yes, there's how to say this, the bell has been rung, and it's what happens when there's that deep unconscious draw, and it pulls that all to the surface. I'm very much with you on where we can learn. And I know the reason I asked about your definition of shamanism is that the people who are in that world one way or the other, shamanic practitioners, etc., are probably the ones who fret the most about the definition, because it obviously comes from a time and a world that was, historically quite appropriative, 19th century anthropology and all the rest of it. So I think we kind of like to sometimes overthink it, right? But it's for the best of reasons. And coming back to how we almost like re-enchant. No, that's not the wrong word. How we can look horizontally and learn from other cosmovisions and other life ways of being in relation to these beings and cycles is one of the other things that I'm like, gosh, is that this is the kind of thing that interests me. Is that too appropriative? But I don't think it is, especially when it comes to something like astrology. And I'll tell you why. One, we're not pretending to be like Caro astrologers. That's importantly. But two, astrology itself is a blend and a mutant. And the one that we have, that, well, say classical Hellenistic astrology is a mix of everything. It's like of everything from Egypt to the Near East to all around the Mediterranean. So it's actually always done that hybrid game. And so I know precisely what you mean about looking at other people who kind of weren't stupid enough to let this fall by the wayside like we have been over the last 1,500 years. And that's why I think that's such a really interesting overlap in how we see and think. Because also the Q'ero are a really good example, or even just the Inca descendants, if you will, because it is the children of the sun thing, so it is a language of light. But also they do that thing that you were talking about earlier, where they can be they're in relation to both planets and signs or asterisms, right? So the Pleiades and different, I guess, star nations. So that they've worked out a language of wider relationality, or they've retained the language of wider relationality that we don't need to replicate precisely. This is the products of thought, ways of thinking difference. We can look at that way of thinking and our products of thought and kind of breathe more life back into them.
Yes, well, about appropriating, or I think it all comes back to the origin, in the sense of what we have in common, and in a sense that might sound simplistic, but we are all humans. We are all born with maybe not exactly the same, but mostly the same faculties and the same potentials, and it is all in a sense within us. So it's kind of anamnesis, it's kind of how Plato calls it, the remembering.
Yes.
They have their model and they have their model, but there's something essential behind that is your birthright. And these are all there to help you remember that. So instead of adhering to a certain model and making it a gospel or whatever, it should turn you within, to find your experience of it, and there's no manual for that, really. It's just there are working theories, you can say, so it really doesn't matter if you call the third eye the Yachai or the Dantian, or whatever you want to call it, because if you only theorize about it and you can't stop and try to experience the the how do you say, like, sensations or intimations or the sort of information or visions that you get from exercising this, just for the example, then it's barren. It's just, again, the masturbation of words. Sorry.
No, it's cool. No, I understand. I understand completely what you mean.
And that's another way of approaching the same problem. That there is an unparalleled line between experience and knowledge, and knowledge has taken the most emphasis on developing that, but in most cases it is not parallel in any experiential point of reference, because most of the experiential point of reference are mute to intellectual discursive reasoning. So you have to shut that out for engage with different perceptive organs within you, to really understand the other sensors, in the sense that you have to engage with your surroundings, engage with the world, understand different qualities of energy. Um, so when you go to the Keros and you see that they were brought up to that, they are really engaging from their heart, in a sense. They are engaging with different uh, psychic organs that are mostly atrophied for modern Western people. We do get sensations from them, eternally and external, but we don't know how to interpret it, or we try to shut them down, or we avoid it, or we don't. It's there's a real problematic element there. So I think that's an important key, not only for astrological magic experience, but in general for kind of a more of a holistic view of of our inborn faculties, and educating ourselves again on finding them, in a sense, and activating them, and growing out of our almost pathological focus with the mind, with thinking.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're definitely onto something there, right? Because it's almost like you learn that coming into relation with these beings and developing that inner capacity is possible. So you don't learn from, say, the Kero or some other cosmovision. You don't learn to contact their beings necessarily, but you learn that contact is possible. So that and that's, I think, that's the exciting moment, I think, where we're at, is that we can look and go, this comes back to what you're saying about humans having some fundamental similarities. And so if it's real, Terence McKenna would say, if it's real, it can take the pressure. And I think this kind of stuff is a good example of that. And it's also why I really vibe on where you're at with dare I say, the overlap, or putting shamanic cosmovisions into dialogue with where contemporary astrology is. And the Abaris Peter Kingsley thing's worth talking about, I think, a little bit more for people who are a bit unfamiliar, because I've read all this stuff. I actually don't like him much as a writer.
I can understand you.
Yeah, I think it's quite self-indulgent and slow and fake lyrical. But for people who don't know, what he did that was very out of fashion was to suggest that early European cultures, in particular early Greek culture, has an origin in, it's now a dangerous word, Eurasia, right? So that there are strong influences, because that was one of the 19th century ideas that ended up being a little bit racist for a while there, as people went looking for the Aryans in India and all this kind of stuff. There's this sort of implication that there was a superior race in Eurasia, and they were, in the 19th century, with this idea that maybe they were the origins of Europeans and all this kind of stuff. So we kind of left it by the wayside for 100 years for pretty good reasons. Like the first time we did it, it was quite racist. But it's probably, and this is where it was bold of him to do, it's still probably true. I mean, Europe is this tiny little bit attached to this enormous world island. Where else are people going to come from? And if you do approach it with the sensitivity of cultures and worldviews in dialogue, rather than the 19th century idea of like an invading superior race, then you actually start to pick more stuff up. And at the time depths he speaks about, the Abaris story, a story waiting to pierce you, all that kind of Kingsley stuff. At those time depths, you open up the possibility of putting archaic Greece and the Andes in dialogue, because you can go far enough back to when there was a shared ancestry, like the 10,000 year time depth, right? So there's a power to it, and it's a dangerous power because, one, we started up using it for racist reasons, and two, if you use it wrong now, it's still a bit racist because then you can say, oh, we do the same thing as a Kero, and that's not quite right. But there's an invitation to kind of return to like the civilization of the human race, right? Like there's an invitation to go, oh wait, we actually are fundamentally basically the same. And I think that's quite beautiful. What do you reckon?
Well, I resonate with everything you said. Really, um, it's our ancestry, but it's not our ancestry just in the sense of finding the culture that has influenced the other culture or whatever. It's our ancestry as humans living in and with nature, and the faculties of communicating with our surroundings, um, and being empowered by it, and that might sound a bit new ageic, but I really believe that we have everything to make this planet a paradise, and that's kind of the broken dream, because as you see the potential of human intelligence, and you see where we are at right now. It's really hard to swallow. It's really nature really gives us everything we need, truly. We could really be in a very, very advanced symbiotic relationship with nature and the cosmos, and our higher aspects, you can say, of the soul or whatever, if we would have been um, how do you say, taught this from an early age, if that was the values of our society. But the values have been hijacked and surrogated with so
Yes.
many things. It's so I think this is the pathology of modern man. We are wounded. We don't know that. We're not conscious of it, but we are wounded as we have been torn away from the cosmos and from our cosmic origins, which are not only linear in time.
Yeah.
And that's another aspect. You can see that in a couple of dimensions. The origins as they are at any moment, which you can see that as a story unfolding in time, of course. But so I think the earliest expressions of, you can say, shamanic cultures that were living that these kinds of interaction, that they're embedded in a living cosmos, and communicating with it, etc., is a sentiment, uh, is a human sentiment. It's not only Siberian or Mongolian or or Andean. The Inca tradition also took a lot from other earlier traditions, and made their own composition of things. Uh, this is what we do. It's kind of like genes. We always mix them and hybrid them, and make new things. Mythology is a bit like genes in that sense. Also, you can see that over history.
Yeah.
Kind of how the pieces combine. We talked about this a little bit. So I really think that we can miss the ball if we're always looking externally to find a birthright. But we do have to have that activation probably coming from external people that are still living that way, or are
Yes.
closer to live that way.
And
And of course, we have helper plants
of
that
course.
connect to that state.
Yeah, I would. It's so I want to pick up on something you said there about birthright, and ancestry and so on. Like it's our ancestry, and that is both a gift and an obligation, right? So you can't just look at it as, oh, I guess I can. Not that either of us or anyone listening to the show thinks this, but it doesn't mean, oh, I guess I can be a shaman because there's Eurasian influence in ancient Greece, right? That's not it. But what it does come with is the gift and the obligation. And the obligation is that return to right relation. As you just said, we aren't, it's, you won't find too many people on this planet who think we're living right. There's some room for improvement. And that kind of, oh, cool. So we have some, broadly speaking, shamanic origins of classical European civilization. That's great. It also comes with I guess we've not only have we forgotten that, we've really forgotten that. Like we haven't lived up to that ancestral obligation, or lived up to that birthright as well as that inheritance, which is something I'm sitting with as a way of reframing the. And it's usually a dismissal based out of fear. The people who are kind of concerned about or making accusations of appropriation are generally the ones that are sort of embedded in a very fixed way of thinking that something a bit more animist they may find threatening. And the point, the point is well made that Peruvian systems are hybrids themselves. So one of my favorite artists in the world is Pablo Amaringo, who basically invented, in his own way, visionary ayahuasca art. And he was an ayahuasquero for years, and a curandero and so on. And if you study his paintings, and I do, there are Indian sages, there are chakras, there are UFOs, there are people from, like, because coming back to the Terence McKenna thing, if it's real, it can take the pressure. So yes, most of the paintings are there in the kind of Ucayali area with Shipibo shamans and Shipibo spirit beings, but there's also the spirit of Jupiter and UFOs and Indian sages and mystics and all these kind of this blend of beings that he encountered, because wait for it, they're real.
Yes, exactly, and it's a rich, a very rich mixture of you can say uh, cultural perspectives, but you can also say different types of ways to relate. Specifically, as you said in your presentation, to the sky, sky country. There's different ways to relate, but they always kind of share something. And I think the universal always unites us, but the differences, always divides us. And it is an important for both, as they need to live kind of. Uh, you can say differences needs to be included in the whole. And of course, this is again a very philosophical kind of principle, the one of the many, etc. But when we get down to the universals, we all need love, for instance. We all need, we all share a spectrum of human emotion. You can find that everywhere, even if in places not touched by Western civilization. They all have anger and fear and and love and attraction, whatever. The universals connect us, and I think that looking at all the scattered doctrines, they all also point to a universal element that needs to wake up at the moment. And I think that also has to do with the definition of magic, for instance. That might be a big topic to get into now, but kind of make way for understanding that we are all in that sense magical beings with abilities to influence reality, influence other people, take things from the elements and make a computer out of them. These are really, technology is well, that might be too big for
Yeah.
that for us now.
Another
But
show,
yeah,
technology. I did I had a show at the Guggenheim, Technology is Habitat, and it was basically about putting techne and thoughts and magic and ideas and the good and the bad in conversation with UFOs and what it means to be creating things and out of what and yeah. So I'm with you. It
yes,
is a big topic. Uh,
it is. It is. It
yeah,
is. But just
yeah.
one point that came up in relation to what you said before, in that anamnesis is that remembrance. I think astrology, and that's what it did for me. But I think, first of all, even without going to the details on what astrology can do and the way that it can define or articulate certain things in your life, in your soul, uh, I think part of what it is supposed to do, or hopefully needs to do, is remind us of that connection.
Hmm.
Is remind us of that connection, even without understanding the details. Oh wow, it's written in the sky, and it's meaningful, and it's part of an outlook of life that looks at the cosmos as a living being, as an intelligence. So it's so it's something that helps us to reconnect with that inner knowing, that there's this intimate connection, this intimate correspondence between everything, all scales and all chains of being or whatever. Everything is breathing together, and that's healing in itself.
Yes.
I see clients, sometimes only from that feeling, from that understanding, regaining a sort of meaningful connection with the universe, and seeing their lives as meaningful and teleological, in a sense, having a
Yeah.
telos, having a purpose, um, and that's deeply healing and deeply meaningful for us, as humans, and that's re-enchanting really the cosmos after it was killed by scientific thinking for so long.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I agree completely that the the transformational effect of knowing in your bones that your life isn't just one damn thing after another that means nothing to anyone and then you die.
yes,
The fact that you actually it's the opposite and you are the center of a many billion year old cosmic opera and the entire universe is in a state of co-delight with you. Wonderful. Even when things are bad, which is typically when people come to fortune tellers, but if anything, that's when the medicine is the most needed, when bad things are happening and people kind of need to return to that idea that good things will also happen. But even when the bad things are happening, it is in a framework of a meaningful universe. And so that is enough to provide that kind of like first medicine dose, I think.
yes, yes. And the shamanic magical perspectives also gives you tools to be able to do something about it, to the extent possible, to change your perspective, your experience, and channel these powers in a better way or more healthy way, or so this is why I think it's also paramount to connect the two, to
Yeah.
first of all kind of rekindle that shamanic sentiment, which is, I think, universal and deeply ingrained with us, and then use the astrological prognostic tools to help you realign, consciously, intellectually, physically, psychically, and make vessels in your life that can bring forth certain potencies. Of course, of course, there could be a long debate about the uh, the use of magic for personal ego means or something, or desire based, or something that is more of a spiritual path, or something that takes into account um, the community. And I'm not trying to invalidate any part of those. You know, I think they're all valid to an extent. I think the essence is regaining that power and taking that power back, and understanding that you're not speaking into a vacuum. You know, that the cosmos is populated by souls and entities and spirits, and
Yes.
you know, it's
Yeah.
unbelievably alive in ways that you cannot even imagine. And I was awestruck by that so many times in my own experiences that, you know, um, so that's I think the essence of kind of combining it, which is organically combined from the beginning, right? But recombining the shamanic roots of the direct experience of the sky, with the knowledge gained from scientific explorations and, you know, development of astrological tools, um, and always trust the direct experience, you know, because rules are sometimes very crude, um, and there's no explanations, and you know, and part of the path is experimenting and trusting, um, you know, trusting your inner compass in a sense. Or uh,
I
yeah,
like it. Well, there are other ways. There are other ways to get people started on that journey. We kept you for long enough, so let's talk about. I'm going to attempt my screen share. Let's talk about the course. The course that's coming up.
yes,
All
thank you.
right. Oh, I didn't even see there's election next weekend too.
Yeah,
Starlight Magic and Eros.
yes.
Is that your own OnlyFans, Michael?
Is that what?
Is that your OnlyFans? That's a dirty joke. But I specifically, we'll talk about that in a sec. But I specifically because I've loved this chat and I've loved talking about um, that deep shamanic origins of astrology and what can happen to an astrological practice when you kind of restore, dare I say, its true history, or at least true's overstating it, but you give it back a longer history. And I think this is one of the things. So tell us about the course that's coming up.
Yeah, so the course is a month and a half, 6 sessions, live on Zoom. And it's kind of the culmination of these 2 decades by which I am experimenting and trying to decipher, you know, the ancient cosmological structure of astrology and astro magic. And so this is kind of the how do you say, the product of that. And I think what makes this course unique, hopefully, is that it's also a hands-on kind of course. You know, we lay the theory, but then we do the practice and experience the teachings. And the course will culminate in a creation of a talisman that we will do together. Um, yeah, and that's it really. I think that people that do astrology and are still missing this element, I think that's really important for them to have the tools to understand and engage and understand the principle behind the workings of astral magic, and also understand that astrological magic is not only focused on talisman making. You know? Talisman making and the principles of talisman making are important and are usable for many other ways of engaging and drawing forth potencies from planetary powers, etc. And creating, artists can use that for their creative work. So really, the sky's the limit, but what you can do with this knowledge. and the lecture
Oh yeah,
is yeah, it's an hour and a half lecture about the role of eros in magic. So a little bit of the mythology and philosophy, because eros is a really loaded term. It's not really, it's not only love, and it's not only sexual love, and it's kind of that attractive um, quality or virtue um, that is inherent in kind of as a connective tissue in everything um, in our world, and in the different levels as the Platonic and Neoplatonic schools would see it, kind of drawn to each other and drawn to this creative impulse to mimic each other, which is I think, in the heart of the magical work in so many ways. It's hard to explain on one foot, but
sure.
there's many layers to this. So it's kind of the eros inside the creative fire, or what I call the secret fire, which is kind of the um, the living energy by which we create from, and its different levels. And I will explain this in this lecture, and give some uh, exercises or tips on how to kind of connect to that energy and work with it. So this is this lecture. So
Nice. That's
it's
that because it's Sunday evening here, so it's next weekend at the time of live recording, depending on when people listen to this. But that's Saturday, February 12th. That will be my early Sunday morning. But for everyone else, that's like 1:30 Eastern on Saturday, next Saturday, depending on when you're listening to or watching this. Very cool. That sounds right up my alley. I think, assuming it's not 4 a.m. I'll give it a shot. The joys of living at the edge of the world where no one else lives.
I envy that.
Yeah, most of the time it's really, really good. Most of the time, yeah, especially if you're feeling a little misanthropic of late, and I have. But yeah, it's generally good. But sometimes you get up at strange o'clock to attend.
Strange o'clock to the whole world.
Yeah, pretty much. And also, I mean, because half of my friends are astrologers, and they don't keep farming hours, Michael. So I like to get up early. I like to go to sleep early. And I have friends messaging me, and it's like 2 or 3 in the morning where they are, and I'm like, this just seems like anarchy for me. So I'm made for farming and podcasting. But I'm gonna. That one looks really fun. I'm definitely gonna jump in on that.
Yes.
So that's Hermetic/astrology, or hermetic-astrology.com. Where else can they find you, and anything else you got going on? What's happening?
Well, right now the only social media platform that I'm connected to is Facebook. I have a professional page there, which I try to to make more active. But everything I have to offer, I also offer there, so they can contact me and follow my professional page, or my personal page, or whatever people prefer. And they can contact me also by my email. I try to answer every question, or um, you know yeah,
Query, question? Yeah, sure. Nice
question,
one.
or any any sort of interaction that I find interesting with people. I'm always up to
Brilliant.
that.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I knew I was going to thoroughly enjoy this chat, and I did. You talk about two of my favorite things, and we have some. There's a lot of overlap in our thinking, and so really cool chat. And yeah, thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Gordon. I enjoy this very much, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh
And
yes, yeah, and
I
we'll do
hope
it
we do
again.
it again one day.